Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session of Breathing and Exchange of Gases, Theory Part 2. And today we are going to cover up the NCERT section 14.3, 14.4, and in 14.4, we will cover 14.4.1 and 14.4.2. Disclaimer. Now, let us see the learning objective, what we are going to learn from today's lecture. To understand the mechanism of gaseous exchange in the lungs and tissue, when we are studying about the breathing and exchange of gases, right? So, breathing we have already covered yesterday, and today we are going to cover up the exchange of gases, how the gaseous exchange take place. And in the gaseous exchange take place in the body of a human, two places, one in the lungs and one in the tissue. So we are going to understand the mechanism how the gases exchange take place in the human body. Next, explain the role of alveoli and capillaries in the gas exchange. Okay, so there is a very important role of the alveoli, right? That is the unit of the lungs. Balloon like structure which is having a very minute membrane, that is alveoli, and also there is a capillaries. So these two things are involved in the gaseous exchange. So their role we will understand in today's lecture. Describe the transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide in blood. We will understand how the oxygen and carbon dioxide is transported via blood, right? So that also we are going to cover up. Understand the role of hemoglobin in oxygen transport. Hemoglobin is a very important protein, and it is a component of the RBC, red blood cells or corpuscles. So that how this hemoglobin is helping in the oxygen transport, that also we will cover. Let us see the index part. Exchange of gases, that is 14.3 section of NCERT. Transport of gases, 14.4 section of NCERT. And there in that section there is two parts: transport of oxygen 4.4.1 and transport of carbon dioxide 14.4.2. Then we will summarize today's lecture, and there will be some NCERT based questions, so that also we will see. Some keynotes will be there and some interesting question that you will solve. So let us start today's session. Exchange of gases. So gas exchange occur primarily in the alveoli and between the blood. Alveoli and between blood. And the next point is tissue. When blood reaches to the tissue, there is also exchange of gases takes place. So first point where the gases exchange take place is the alveoli. And where the alveoli and what is alveoli, I hope you know that these are the balloon like structure that is present, or that are the unit of lungs, right? And they are very minute small balloon like structure which is having squamous epithelium. We will see the structure of alveoli, one of the alveoli, and there you will understand how it is helping the exchange of gases. So the exchange of gases is taking place where? Between the alveoli and between the blood, right? And the next point where it is, that is at the when it reaches to the tissue. So again there the blood and tissue, the gases exchange will take place between the blood and tissue. The mechanism is simple diffusion. So now they are talking about that we have already said that there is a gases exchange in the alveoli region and at the region of the tissue. But how? What is the mechanism behind that? By which mechanism the exchange of gases takes place? Simple diffusion. Simple diffusion. And you all know that simple diffusion means the diffusion that is based on the pressure gradient, or you can say concentration gradient. It means the molecules will move from higher pressure to the lower pressure, higher pressure to the lower pressure, or higher concentration to the lower concentration, right? Gradient means the difference of pressure or the difference of concentration. Partial pressure. Now, this is a very, very important point. Partial pressure. So, let us understand what is the meaning of partial pressure. So, you all know that the air is a mixture of gases. Air is a mixture of gases, and there are many gases in the air, like oxygen is there, right? Carbon dioxide is there, and nitrogen is also there, right? So, pressure contributed by individual gas in a mixture. Air is a mixture of gases, right? So, individual gas produces some pressure. So, that pressure is called as partial pressure of that particular gas. Partial pressure of that particular gas. If it is, if it is oxygen, then you will say that partial pressure of oxygen. If it is carbon dioxide, then you will say the pressure exerted by carbon dioxide, then you will say it is the pressure, partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Why we are saying this term partial pressure? Because the pressure exerted by air, it is a sum of PO2 plus PCO2 plus PN2. Means every gas is contributing its own pressure, and that becomes the pressure exerted by air. But when you are talking about the pressure exerted by oxygen, then it is the partial pressure. Pressure exerted by carbon dioxide, then again it is the partial pressure exerted by carbon dioxide, right? So, partial pressure means the pressure exerted by individual gas in a mixture, right? So, we will see a table also later on. So, here you can see the exchange of gases taking place at the two particular points. One in the lungs. What happened? The blood is present in the capillaries, and the capillaries is running all over the alveoli, very minute capillaries, and alveoli is having oxygen, whereas the capillaries is having the deoxygenated blood, right? So when there is an exchange of gases, means the oxygen moves to the blood, and from blood the carbon dioxide moves to the alveoli. So your blood become oxygenated. Okay, so here you can see the oxygen is taken by the RBC, red blood cells. It reaches to the organ, and organ is made up of different types of tissues. So there they give out oxygen. This RBC gives out oxygen, and this organ or the tissue gives out carbon dioxide to the RBC, and this RBC takes that carbon dioxide again back to the lungs to get it purified. So heart is also helping in this circulation, that you will understand later on. So here it is very, very important to understand the partial pressure. I hope you understand PO2 and PCO2, that is the gases exerting its own individual pressure in a mixture of gas, that is air. Now, we have talked about according to the concentration gradient, there is a diffusion. Now, let us understand what are the factors that are affecting the diffusion process. Pressure gradient. The greater the difference in the partial pressure, the faster the diffusion. What does this mean? See, the partial pressure of oxygen in the air, in the atmosphere, it is around 159. It is around 159. And what is the and what about in alveoli? It is 104. So now you can see the difference. 159 in the atmosphere, partial pressure of oxygen, and 104 in the 104 in the alveoli. So this is the difference of oxygen, right? Now let us see the carbon dioxide. The atmospheric air is having carbon dioxide. What is the concentration or what is the partial pressure? 0.3. 0.3. What about in alveoli? It is 40. So it is a huge difference, right? So they are saying that the greater the difference in the partial pressure, the faster the diffusion, right? The diffusion rate will be more fast. If there is a difference of the partial pressure is like 159 and 140, and it is a very less difference. So the diffusion will be there, but at a slow rate. But if it is 159 and 104, right, then it will be, the diffusion will takes at a faster pace. So the pressure gradient is a very important factor that affect the process of diffusion. Solubility of gases. Now you can see this carbon dioxide is more soluble than oxygen. Carbon dioxide is more soluble than oxygen. CO2 is 20 to 25 times more soluble than oxygen. So which one will get dissolved faster in the blood? It is carbon dioxide, right? So it diffuses much faster. This line is very important. And thickness of the membrane, again the thickness of the membrane is very important. If the membrane is very thick, then the diffusion rate will be affected, right? So let us see. The thinner the membrane, the faster the diffusion. Now here you can see. This is a blood capillaries and this is the alveoli. This is one of the alveoli that is showing in the diagram. This alveoli is a unit structure of the lungs, you can say. Now see, this is the wall of the alveoli. The wall of the alveoli. What it is made up of? Squamous epithelium of alveolar wall, one celled thick. It is single cell thick. And there was a question in one of our chapter that through which of the epithelium there will be the faster diffusion rate? Columnar epithelium, cuboidal epithelium, squamous epithelium, or all of the above? So here you can get that particular answer is squamous epithelium, because the squamous epithelium is very thin layer of cell, right? So that simple squamous epithelium, yes, it is making the wall of the alveoli and it is very thin layer. Now see, the wall of the blood capillaries, it is made up of endothelium of blood capillaries. So it is also the squamous epithelium. If it is written endothelium, means it is again the squamous epithelium, right? So both the both the alveoli as well as your blood capillaries is having the squamous epithelium, and in between it is a basement membrane. In between it is the basement membrane. So membrane, it is just a simple substance like thing. It is not any type of like squamous epithelium or any epithelial tissue is there. It is not like that. Okay, it is a simple membranous type of things present in between the cavity, that is the alveoli, this alveoli region, and the your blood capillary. Now you can see the blood is flowing. The blood is flowing in the blood capillary, RBC. And here you can see the RBC. Now what this RBC is having? What this RBC is carrying with it? Which gas? more of carbon dioxide. More of carbon dioxide. It is a deoxygenated blood, right? It is deoxygenated blood. So more concentration of carbon dioxide is here. It is actually how much? So it is having more of carbon dioxide. In the case of alveoli, the carbon dioxide, this blood, it is having around 40, right? And alveoli is having more of oxygen concentration. It is around 104. So the oxygen concentration in alveoli is larger as compared to the blood in the blood capillary. So oxygen will move from higher concentration to the lower concentration. And at the same time, the concentration of carbon dioxide is less in the alveoli, whereas in the blood capillaries it is higher. So carbon dioxide will also move from region of higher concentration to the region of lower concentration, that is from blood capillaries to the alveoli cavity, right? So in this way you can see both the carbon dioxide and oxygen is moving through the pressure gradient or concentration gradient, right? It is very very important. So this diagram is important for two things. One is the membrane that is made up of the squamous epithelium, and how the gas is moving from blood to the alveoli and alveoli to the blood. Which gas is moving from alveoli to the blood? It is oxygen, and from blood to the alveoli, that is carbon dioxide. So gases exchange is taking place here, and here the thickness of membrane is a very very important factor. The thinner the membrane, the faster the diffusion. Okay, now you can see these balloon like structure, they are not flat like things, they are not flat cells, they are round balloon like structure, small balloon like structure. So that increases the surface area. If you see the structure of alveoli, it is having small balloon like structure. The one which you see here, it is a cluster of alveoli cavity. It is a cluster of alveoli cavity. So that cluster increases the surface area. It increases the surface area, and it allow more and more exchange of gases to takes place, right? It is not just one single balloon, it is numerous balloon, and they are packed in a compact, in a cluster form. And at every alveoli there is running the blood capillaries at the outer surface. The blood capillaries is running at the outer surface, and there the exchange of gases take. So surface area is again a very very important factor in the case of alveoli, right? The diffusion membrane, it consists of three layers. The thin squamous epithelium of the alveoli that we have already seen, right? The squamous epithelium is there, that helps into gaseous exchange, and we have already discussed about this, that the squamous epithelium is the thinnest epithelium that allow the gaseous exchange, or the rate of diffusion is higher if you compare it with the other types of epithelium. Second, the endothelium of the alveolar capillary. So two membranes made up of squamous epithelium. One membrane of the alveoli and another of the blood capillaries. That is also called as alveolar capillaries. Alveolar capillary. And the third one is the basement substance. It is actually substance between them. It is not correct to say that it is a membrane. It is not a membrane. It is a substance that is filled between the squamous epithelium of the alveoli and the basement, this alveolar capillaries, endothelium layer of the alveolar capillaries. So three things is there, right? It can be asked in the examination. Its total thickness is less than a millimeter. Now here you can see less than a millimeter, facilitating efficient exchange. Why they are thin? Because they have to, the main function is here, exchange of gases. If the wall is thick, then the exchange of gas will be affected, right? So they keeps their membrane very thin so that the exchange of gases will be at a higher rate, facilitating efficient gases exchange. So in the diagram, in this diagram also, that is the same one, and you can see the basement substance, the squamous epithelium and the endothelium of the blood capillary, right? Yes, they are moist. They are moist because if they are dry, then gases exchange will not be at a proper rate. So they are moist so that the gases exchange will be at a higher rate. And you all know that in the air there is a presence of water vapor. Water vapor is always there. So that makes this moist. That makes the membrane moist. Factor affecting diffusion. Let us understand what are the different factors that affect the process of diffusion. We have understood what is diffusion and how it is like going on. Now see here, partial pressure in mmHg. Okay, in the barometer, this is the mercury, and we measure the rising of the mercury in the millimeter. So it is mentioned here, it is mmHg. Now see, at the atmospheric air, what is the partial pressure? The partial pressure of oxygen in the atmospheric air is 159. And carbon dioxide, what is the partial pressure of carbon dioxide? It is 0.3, very less, 0.3. Yes, alveoli, but it changes in the alveoli. See, what a drastic change you see in the partial pressure of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the alveoli. Oxygen is 104. Oxygen is 104 and carbon dioxide, it is 40. In the blood, and when the blood is deoxygenated, the partial pressure of oxygen, 100% oxygen which is oxygenated, is not used. It is not used. Still some of the oxygen is left, right? So the blood which is deoxygenated is still having some oxygen, and that is 40. That is the partial pressure of oxygen in the deoxygenated blood is 40. C, it is 45. Which gas? Carbon dioxide. The partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the deoxygenated blood is 45. And see, very less difference. Very less, 40 and 45. Still, there is a exchange of gases taking place. Next, blood. Oxygenated blood. After the exchange of gases taken place in the alveoli region. So it is 95. From deoxygenated C, it reaches to the 95. And 45, it was 45, now it is 40. The oxygenated is still having some carbon dioxide, and its partial pressure is 40. Now see the tissue. Tissue is having 40. Oxygen is used, but still some oxygen is left there. So it is around 40. But the oxygen which has been given by the blood, oxygenated one, it has been used by the tissue for the process of respiration, and it reaches the oxygen 45. Yes. So there we see there is more difference of oxygen in the oxygenated end tissue, but it is less difference of carbon dioxide. So which will move at the faster rate? Oxygen will move at the faster rate, not the carbon dioxide, right? Because we have just now studied the greater the difference between the partial pressure, right? The greater the difference of partial pressure of a gas in two region, then the diffusion rate will be more. And if it is having the less difference, then the diffusion rate will be less. So here we will understand, this is a very, very important. Now here you can see inspired air, inspired air. It is having, this is the inspired air. It is having 104 mmHg of partial pressure of oxygen and PCO2 40 of this carbon dioxide. Now here the pulmonary artery, blue means it is deoxygenated blood. Okay, the blood is coming from the heart via pulmonary artery, and here in the capillary region this deoxygenated blood is 45 carbon dioxide, 45, the concentration is 45. So the carbon dioxide will move to the region of higher concentration to the region of lower concentration, right, in the alveoli. And you can see the difference, 104 here in the alveoli region, and in the deoxygenated blood it is 40. It is 40. So the oxygen will move to the this pulmonary artery, right? So now your blood becomes oxygenated. Now it becomes oxygenated. That is the red one. Here you can see the red one, pulmonary vein. It is having the oxygenated 95. Partial pressure of oxygen become 95 and partial pressure of carbon dioxide become 45, right? Deoxygenated blood releases oxygen. Deoxygenated blood is not releasing oxygen. It is not releasing, it is taking oxygen. See, pulmonary artery which carries deoxygenated blood. This is exception, right? Artery always carries the pure blood, oxygenated. But in the case of here, in the case of uh, pulmonary artery, this is an exception that carry deoxygenated blood. And you have read about that veins always carry deoxygenated blood, but here you can see the vein is carrying the oxygenated blood. So deoxygenated blood is not releasing oxygen, it is taking oxygen from the alveoli. It is already having some concentration of oxygen, because all the oxygen has not been used. All the oxygen has not been used. But see the difference. Alveoli is having 104 and deoxygenated blood is having only 40. So oxygen will move from alveoli to the blood. Clear? It is clear? And you can see the deoxygenated blood is having 45 partial pressure and alveoli is having carbon dioxide of 40. So this again carbon dioxide move from higher to the lower concentration or pressure gradient. Right? So here the this from pulmonary artery, the oxygenated blood is brought back to the heart. Heart will pump the blood. So heart, see, you can see the aorta, it is coming out, and the systemic arteries, the arteries that reaches to the body parts, that is called a systemic artery. So it is carrying the blood here and it is reaching to the tissue. It is reaching to the tissue. Now this is the concentration of the oxygen and carbon dioxide in the oxygenated blood. See the table. Blood oxygenated 95 40, 95 oxygen and 40 carbon dioxide. So it is mentioned here. You can see this. carrying oxygenated blood. This is the partial pressure of oxygen and partial pressure of carbon dioxide in oxygenated blood, right? Now, what happened when it reaches to the tissue? When it reaches to the tissue, see, this is the partial pressure 40 and 45. The partial pressure of oxygen in the tissue is 40 and partial pressure of carbon dioxide is 45. So 95 it is higher and tissue is having 40. So oxygen will move from this blood capillaries to the tissue, and tissue is having 45 partial pressure of carbon dioxide. So it will move to the this artery, right? And now, this is the systemic vein that gives out the vein, and this vein carries the deoxygenated blood brought back to the heart. So, here you can see these numbers which you see in the table is very, very important. Because of this partial pressure only, there is an exchange of gases taking place, right? Now, blood is the primary medium of transporting oxygen and carbon dioxide. Now, we will understand how the transport of gases takes place. Second topic, transport of gases, right? And which is the substance that transporting medium, working as a transporting medium? It is blood. So, blood is the primary medium for transporting the oxygen and carbon dioxide. Now, we will study about the transport of oxygen first. Hemoglobin is a red color iron containing pigment present in the RBC. So, this is one of the, you can say, the pigment made up of a protein and iron, and it is a red color pigment, right, containing iron and present in the RBC, right? So, here you can see this is the RBC, red blood corpuscles or red blood cells. Now, here this is the lung, the organ, you can see the lung, and here what is happening? Oxygen is taking place by this RBC. So, one hemoglobin molecule can take 4 molecules of oxygen. Am I repeating again? One molecule of RBC can take 4 molecules of oxygen, right? So, here you can see the oxygen in RBC, and you all know that the human RBCs are enucleated. Enucleated means they are not having any nucleus. They are not having any nucleus, RBC, and this RBC can take the oxygen molecule in their this part. You can say this is the biconcave concave structure. So the oxygen molecule can easily take place or carried by the RBC cell, right? So that is why they are not having any nucleus. So oxygen in the red blood cells is carried, and when it reaches to the organ, different organ, here it is stomach and liver, it is shown. So oxygen is given to that particular organ, and from that organ, whatever the carbon dioxide has been produced, it is taken back by it. So here, for transport of oxygen, which is the main component, you have to remember hemoglobin is the main component, and this component is present in the RBC itself, right? Transport of oxygen. So 97% is transported by hemoglobin in RBC, forming oxyhemoglobin. Now see the percentage. See the percentage. 97% of the hemoglobin is transported by RBC by forming oxyhemoglobin. When oxygen combined with the hemoglobin, it is called as oxyhemoglobin, right? 3% is transported in a dissolved state in plasma, right? You all know that a large percentage of the blood is made up of plasma. So plasma, some oxygen also get dissolved in the plasma. So what is the percentage? See, 3%. So you can say that most of the oxygen is transported by the help of hemoglobin only in the form of oxyhemoglobin. Hmm. One hemoglobin molecule can bind with a maximum of 4 oxygen molecules. One hemoglobin, right? They're talking about one hemoglobin. And you should remember this number, that what is the number of oxygen molecule. Number of oxygen molecule is 4. And the 4, this 4 molecules of oxygen, because 4 heme, 4 iron group are there, right? And plasma percentage is 55. It is 55, right? The remaining 45% is the blood cells and the blood proteins and platelets part. But still, only 3% of oxygen is transported via plasma, right? Now, there is the oxygen dissociation curve. We will discuss this. Oxygen dissociation curve. Now, a sigmoid S-shaped curve showing the relationship between the partial pressure of oxygen and the percentage saturation of hemoglobin. Percentage saturation of hemoglobin. Now, we will see what are the factors favoring the binding in alveoli. In alveoli, very, very important. This point is very important where we are talking about. In alveoli, these are the things that are supporting what? Supporting for the binding of oxygen with the hemoglobin, right? So what are the things that support that? High pressure of oxygen, partial pressure of oxygen. So the partial pressure of oxygen should be more in the case of alveoli. Low pressure of carbon dioxide, low partial pressure of carbon dioxide. And one more thing, lower temperature, not high temperature, lower temperature. So these are the three things that favors the combination or combining of oxygen with the hemoglobin. Now see what is mentioned on the x and y axis of the graph. Partial pressure of oxygen. Here you can see 0, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. Partial pressure of oxygen in mmHg. And here you can see the percentage of saturation of hemoglobin with the oxygen, right? So here we can see at initially it is showing the exponential growth, means as the partial pressure is increasing, you can see the saturation of hemoglobin. What is the meaning of saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen? Means the oxygen is getting, it is combining with the hemoglobin. It is combining with the hemoglobin protein, right? So as the pressure is increases, see at the 20, it reaches here 25. At 30, it reaches 60. At 40, it reaches around 80 or less than that, 75 around. 60, it reaches to 90. And around 80, you can see it is all the hemoglobin get concentrated or saturated. All the hemoglobin gets saturated, means all the oxygen which is present there, it is combined with the hemoglobin. So it becomes straight here. So what, see the shape of this curve, it is S shape. And this S shape is favor, this type of S shape will form only when these three conditions are there. High PO2 means high partial pressure of oxygen, low partial pressure of carbon dioxide, and lower the temperature. When these things will be there, then there is a favoring of the formation of this sigmoid curve, right? So this is showing the relation between the partial pressure of oxygen and the percentage saturation of hemoglobin. Now, oxygen dissociation curve, where this curve dissociate, where the dissociation of oxygen from the hemoglobin takes place, when it reaches to the tissue. Yes, when it reaches to the tissue, the hemoglobin and oxygen, means oxyhemoglobin, get dissociated. So what are the things that favors the dissociation of oxyhemoglobin? So when it reaches to the tissue, low partial pressure of oxygen, low partial pressure of oxygen, where? In the tissue. The tissue should not have high partial pressure of oxygen, it should have lower partial pressure of oxygen, because the blood which is brought to the tissue is already having high partial pressure of oxygen. So the tissue should have low partial pressure of oxygen, right? Now see, high partial pressure of carbon dioxide in tissue, the the partial pressure of carbon dioxide should be high. Higher temperature in the tissue, the temperature should be high, and high hydrogen ion concentration. So when these things will be there, there is a dissociation of the oxyhemoglobin that takes place at the tissue. So the condition, the factors of dissociation and factors of association in the alveoli and in the tissue, you should remember. That is very, very important point. Now, transport of oxygen, there some are irregularities in ODC, oxygen dissociation curve, left shift in the O2 dissociation curve, increase O2 affinity for the hemoglobin, and enhanced O2 loading in the lungs. So here you can see the midline, that is showing the normal condition, but sometimes this line can shift to the this side, right side, and sometime it shift to the left side, right? So what are the condition? It is here acute alkaloidosis. Alkaloidosis means it refers to the condition where the blood is excessively alkaline due to the rapid disturbance in the body. Acid base balance, suppose the acid base balance is not there, acid base balance is not properly maintained in the body, specifically when the blood pH is higher than the normal, that is above 7.45, right? So that is acute alkalosis, right? And hyperalkalosis, it occur when rapid decrease in the blood carbon dioxide or hyperventilation. When you go to the higher altitude, there the oxygen is less, the oxygen is less. Yes, oxygen is not present at a normal rate, right? So these are the some of the things that affect the this S curve. Increase O2 affinity for the hemoglobin will be affected, enhance O2 loading in the lungs will be affected. Left shift in O2 dissociation curve. This is mentioned here. Now here it is mentioned reduced O2 unloading in the tissue. Unloading of oxygen in the tissue will be affected, caused by decreased CO2. If the concentration of carbon dioxide is less in the tissue, and that is increases pH, alkalosis, decrease in temperature, decreased 2,3 DPG, DPG, that is diphosphoglyceric acid molecule found in the red blood cells, and it regulates the release of oxygen in the tissue from hemoglobin, right? So if there is a decrease of DPG, that is diphosphoglyceric acid, then what will happen? The regulation will be affected, that is dissociation of oxygen from the oxyhemoglobin and reaching to the tissue will be affected, right? So these are some of the things that can affect the uh, dissociation curve, oxygen dissociation curve. Right shift now we will talk about. Decrease O2 affinity for hemoglobin. Oxygen will not combine with the hemoglobin. Reduced O2 loading in the lungs, right? When you go to the higher altitude, it shift to the right side. Oxygen affinity, oxygen is not there. So oxygen, all the hemoglobin will not combine with the oxygen as the oxygen is less present there, right? Enhanced O2 unloading in tissue causes increased CO2, decreased pH acidosis, and increased in temperature, increased 2,3 DPG that we have already discussed. So increase O2 affinity for hemoglobin. When it is left shift, it is showing the increased O2 affinity for hemoglobin. Enhanced O2 loading in lungs. In the lungs, there will be enhanced O2 loading. Reduced O2 unloading in the tissue. But the unloading of the tissue will be less because of the decreased CO2, increase in the pH. This is the condition why it is occurring. Increased pH, that is alkalosis, and decrease in temperature. Decreased O2 affinity for hemoglobin, reduced O2 loading in the lungs, and that is caused by the CO2, decreased pH, and increased temperature. Now we will talk about the transport of carbon dioxide. 70% is transported as bicarbonate. There are some bicarbonate that is mentioned at HCO3 minus ion, HCO3. 70% of it is transported as a bicarbonate ion, and 20 to 25% binds to hemoglobin. 20 to 25% of it is binds to the hemoglobin, and that is called as carbaminohemoglobin. Carbaminohemoglobin. 7% is dissolved in plasma. Now this is a very, very important data. Now here you can see the oxygen is transported only by two means. Once by the hemoglobin and another by the plasma. 97 and 3% respectively. See, for the carbon dioxide, 70% it is transported as a bicarbonate ion, 20 to 25% as a carbaminohemoglobin, and 7% as a dissolved in plasma. So here you can see this is a tissue. Inside the tissue, carbon dioxide is produced. Now carbon dioxide passing through here in the this blood, and here you can see the RBCs are there. Now this CO2 is entering inside the this RBC, and there H2O is there, so it combined with the H2O and form H2CO3. H2CO3 in the presence of enzyme that is called as carbonic anhydrase. Carbonic anhydrase. Now this H2CO3 is broken down as HCO3 minus ion and H plus ion, right? HCO3. So this bicarbonate, 70% of it is transported as a bicarbonate. Now you can see the increase in the here. There is an increase of minus ion. Increase of minus ion due to the formation of bicarbonate in the RBC. So this bicarbonate is transported back to the plasma, okay, from the RBC. And for this, to maintain the balance, the chlorine or chloride ion is taken inside it, because chloride ion is also having one minus ion, so it get enter inside it, right? So in this way the carbon dioxide is transported, but once it reaches to the alveoli, see, the bicarbonate is again taken back, chlorine is taken out, and it combined with hydrogen ion H2CO3, and again because it is a reversible reaction, carbonic anhydrase follows the reversible reaction, so it will broken into carbon dioxide and H2O. Now the carbon dioxide is released from the RBC and it goes to the alveoli. You can see how the bicarbonate ion is important. The enzyme carbonic anhydrase in the RBC rapidly convert carbon dioxide and water into carbonic acid, which then dissociate into hydrogen ion and bicarbonate ion. Every 100 ml of deoxygenated blood delivers approximately 4 ml of carbon dioxide to the alveoli. 100 ml of deoxygenated blood, the blood that combined with the carbon dioxide, is delivering approximately 4 ml of carbon dioxide to the alveoli, right? So this, they are talking about this. 4 ml of carbon dioxide is transported to the alveoli, and if this is the 100 ml of deoxygenated. Now chloride shift. We have just now studied about the chloride shift. To maintain the ionic balance, bicarbonate ion moves out of the RBC into the plasma, while chloride ion, because it is also having the minus sign, it moves inside. So the reverse occur in the lungs. This is occurring in the at the region of the tissue when it is taking the carbon dioxide. But once it reaches to the lungs region, it gives out carbon dioxide. So this is the Bohr effect that you were discussing about. Exchange of gases that we have studied today in the summary occurs primarily in the lungs through the alveoli based on simple diffusion. Oxygen moves from alveoli to the blood and carbon dioxide moves from blood to the alveoli, determined by the concentration gradient. So whatever the exchange of gases is taking place, whether it is in the alveoli or at the tissue level, it is based on concentration gradient, facilitated by the large surface area of alveoli. And this is the reason why the alveoli is having the large surface area. Now, regarding the transport of gases, oxygen transport, 97% bound to hemoglobin. 97% of it is bound to the hemoglobin. 3% dissolved in plasma. And when we talk about the carbon dioxide, 70% of carbon dioxide is transported via bicarbonate ion, 23% by the hemoglobin, and 7% by dissolved in plasma. Hemoglobin can bind or release gases based on the partial pressure. So whatever the partial pressure we have discussed in the tabular form regarding the partial pressure. So that partial pressure is it shows how the hemoglobin can bind or release the gases. It is influenced by the temperature, pH and concentration gradient of the carbon dioxide. Right? These are the things that affect the combination or combining hemoglobin with the gases. Now there is one NCERT question, NCERT based question. What are the factors affecting the binding of oxygen with the hemoglobin? Let us see the answer. The factors affecting oxygen binding with the hemoglobin: pH, that is shows the Bohr effect. Lower pH reduces oxygen affinity. Higher pH increases oxygen affinity. If the pH is high, that it increases the oxygen affinity, and when the pH is lower, then it reduces the oxygen affinity. This is the Bohr effect. Temperature. Higher temperature decreases oxygen binding. When the temperature is high, oxygen binding will be reduced, and that is why at the alveoli region one condition is there, that is low temperature should be there, right? Lower temperature increases oxygen binding, so oxygen will easily bind to the hemoglobin. So the temperature is very important factor. Carbon dioxide concentration. Higher CO2 level reduces the oxygen affinity. If the concentration level is higher, then oxygen affinity will be reduced, because the oxygen is more soluble, right? Lower CO2 level increases oxygen affinity. 2,3-diphosphoglycerate. This is one of the substance that regulate the release of oxygen from the oxyhemoglobin when it reaches to the tissue. So higher level decreases the oxygen affinity and important for oxygen delivery to the tissue. This substance is regulating the dissociation of oxyhemoglobin to oxygen and hemoglobin. So oxygen will be released to the tissue. Carbon monoxide is also there. Competes with oxygen for binding site. If the carbon monoxide, once the carbon monoxide combines with the hemoglobin, it will not released. It will not release, right? So that is why it is always said that uh, smoking is injurious to health, because when we smoke, that produces the carbon monoxide, and this carbon monoxide combined with hemoglobin, it will not be released, right? So it is having higher affinity than oxygen that is combining with the hemoglobin. Partial pressure of oxygen. Higher PO2 means partial pressure of oxygen increases the oxygen binding, and lower PO2 decreases the oxygen binding. Genetic factor. Hemoglobin variants can affect binding affinity. Yes, this is also one of the factor, that if there is a variation in the hemoglobin is not normal, then the oxygen and carbon dioxide transport will be affected, because the binding with the oxygen and carbon dioxide will be changed. Some mutation can cause these disorders. Next question. What is the difference between the oxyhemoglobin and carbaminohemoglobin? Very important question. So comparison between the oxyhemoglobin and carbaminohemoglobin. Features: oxyhemoglobin HbO2 and carbaminohemoglobin HbCO2. So formation: formed by the combination of oxygen with the hemoglobin, and carbon dioxide when combined with the hemoglobin, it forms the carbaminohemoglobin, right? Binding site: O2 bind with iron in a heme group, and CO2 bind with the amino group of the globin chain. So globin is a protein that this hemoglobin is made up of. So that CO2 is combined with the amino group of the globin chain, right? Color: oxyhemoglobin is bright red in color, and that is why the blood becomes red when it's combined with the hemoglobin. And here it is dark red. Percentage: carries about 98.5% of oxygen in the blood, and it carries about 23% of CO2 in the blood. Some more differences regarding the bond type: reversible coordination bond, and here is reversible covalent bond. Stability: less stable, and carbaminohemoglobin is the more stable compound. Location: formed in the lungs and broken in down in the tissue, and carbaminohemoglobin is formed in the tissue and broken down in the lung, just opposite. What is the function? Primary oxygen transport is the function of oxyhemoglobin, and secondary carbon dioxide transport is the carbaminohemoglobin function. Some key points: human breathe about 11,000 liters of air daily, and gases exchange occur in the tiny sacs that is called as alveoli. These tiny sacs are present in the lungs, and there are about 300 to 500 million alveoli in human lungs. Now see the numbers. Alveoli walls are just one cell thick, so it facilitates the exchange of gases. Surface area of alveoli is roughly size of tennis court. Hmm? 98%, 98.5% of oxygen is carried by hemoglobin, and one hemoglobin molecule can carry around 4 oxygen molecules. Red blood cells can exchange oxygen 0.25 seconds, and carbon dioxide is transported via 3 different ways: dissolved in the plasma 7%, bound with the hemoglobin 23%, and bicarbonate ion 70 to 75%. It is variable. Blood pH change affect oxygen carrying capacity, and myoglobin stores oxygen in the muscles. Now some interesting question that you can solve. Why can't human extract oxygen directly from water like fish do? Second, why do we feel breathless after running despite having enough oxygen in the air? Third, how does oxyhemoglobin knows when to pick up and when to release oxygen? And fourth, why is carbon monoxide more dangerous than carbon dioxide? This we have discussed. So this is all about today's session. Thank you very much for attending today's session. We will meet again tomorrow, same time. Thank you.